Letters from the hotel room. There are places we stay for a night, and people we love for a moment. But some nights linger forever. Some touches leave echoes long after the door has closed. These are the letters I never sent. Written from hotel rooms in cities that barely knew my name. To lovers I met, lost, or only imagined. Some of them touched my body. Some, only my thoughts. But all of them left something behind. So if you're listening, maybe these letters were meant for you too. Part 1. Rome, Room 304. Dear L. I don't know if you'll ever read this. Maybe that's why I can write it. Maybe that's why I'm writing it at all, because the echo of your laughter still lives in the marble walls of this hotel room, and I don't know how else to make peace with the silence that followed your departure. Rome is still warm, even in October. The air smells like basil and old stones, and when I open the balcony doors, the sound of church bells drifts in like a lullaby for the city. You used to say Rome was made for lovers, but I don't think you meant people like us, strangers who meet at the wrong time and choose not to pretend otherwise. We met downstairs, in the lounge. Do you remember? You wore that navy blue blazer, the one with the subtle pinstripe that made you look like a professor of something ancient. I noticed your hands first, strong but delicate, like you were used to holding books more than people. I was drinking a Negroni I barely liked, trying to look like a woman who didn't mind being alone. You sat 2 tables away. Close enough that I could smell your cologne, something woody, with a trace of citrus. You looked at me once. Then twice. And I smiled because I knew exactly what that second glance meant. You weren't bold, not yet. You waited until my glass was nearly empty before walking over and asking if I was enjoying the cocktail. I told you I wasn't, and you laughed. A real laugh, not the kind people give out of politeness, but the kind that escapes when they're disarmed. We talked for an hour. Maybe 2. I remember your voice, low and thoughtful. You spoke slowly, like each word had been considered. You told me you were here for a conference, something academic and forgettable. I never asked for more detail. I liked not knowing everything about you. I liked the idea that you could remain partly a mystery, even as you unfolded in front of me. When you offered to walk me back to my room, I didn't hesitate. Not because I trusted you, but because I trusted myself. And because the way you looked at me, soft, questioning, but unafraid, made me want to say yes to something I denied myself for too long. Room 304. The hallway smelled like polished wood and old perfume. You stood at the door while I searched for the key code, your hand brushing mine briefly. That was all it took. One brush. One moment of skin on skin. I unlocked the door, and you stepped in behind me, slow and silent, like the city itself had followed us upstairs. We didn't speak much. There wasn't a script for what came next. I remember the light, dim and golden. I remember the way you touched me, not like you were entitled to anything, but like you were discovering something rare. We moved like music. Slow at first, then desperate. There was reverence in your hands, like you were praying with your fingertips. I hadn't been touched like that in years. Do you remember the way my breath caught when you traced the line of my collarbone with your mouth? Or how my hands trembled when I reached for the buttons on your shirt? You stopped me, just for a moment, and kissed my wrist instead. It was the smallest gesture, but it made me feel like everything in the world had narrowed down to that one precise second. You undressed me with patience. as if I were something valuable, something worth remembering. And when you finally entered me, there was no rush, no hunger to conquer. Only the quiet surrender of two people who knew this was all they had. Afterwards, we lay tangled in the sheets, the window still cracked open to the Roman night. I wanted to ask you to stay. Not just in the room, but longer. Maybe even after morning. But I didn't. I've never been good at asking for what I need. Instead, I listened to the sound of your breathing, steady and warm against my shoulder, and I pretended that the moment would last longer than it ever could. You left before dawn. I knew you would. The note you left was brief, almost apologetic. You didn't say you'd see me again. You didn't promise anything. But you did write that you wouldn't forget me. And maybe that's enough. Because I won't forget you either, not the way you looked in the mirror after, eyes soft, lips parted, not the curve of your back as you buttoned your shirt again, not the way your fingertips lingered on my hip like a farewell you didn't want to give. This room still smells like you. The sheets are cold now. And the city has moved on, like cities do. But I stayed a day longer than planned. Just to write this letter. Just to leave behind a memory that no one else will read. Wherever you are, I hope you feel the ghost of me in quiet places. Until we meet again. If we ever do. M. Part 2, Tokyo, Room 812. Dear T. It's nearly midnight in Tokyo, and the city outside my window glows like a circuit board, lines of light stretching into the future, pulsing with life I don't quite belong to. Room 812 is sleek, quiet, and impersonal. Everything is minimalist, white bedding, smooth glass, chrome fixtures. But the memory of you has filled every inch with warmth. You always said Tokyo made you feel like a ghost, seen, but not touched. I understood what you meant, even before we ever shared anything more than polite smiles across the lobby. You arrived 2 days after me, here for the same conference, though we never discussed why either of us was really here. It started with a glance, as so many things do. I had just stepped into the elevator. You followed, briefcase in hand, coat still carrying the scent of the rain outside. I remember looking up at you and feeling something shift, something tiny, like a change in air pressure, but enough to catch my breath. Floor 8, you said in English, your voice low and precise, like you were used to being understood the first time. I pressed the button and nodded. You smiled. That's all it took. We didn't speak again until the next night. The hotel bar was dimly lit, half empty. I was seated alone in the corner, sipping something sweet and unfamiliar. You came in and saw me. Our eyes met, and this time, you came closer. Mind if I join you? Your voice was calmer than mine would have been. I said yes, of course. You talked about the city, how you'd been here before. You asked me if I liked the rain. I said I didn't mind it. You told me it suited me, that I looked like someone who understood melancholy. I laughed at that, but it stayed with me. You were quiet, but not reserved. Thoughtful. Intentional. The kind of man who reads people more than he speaks. By the time we finished our drinks, my pulse had already changed its rhythm. You didn't ask to come to my room. You simply stood beside me in the elevator and let the silence wrap around us like a second skin. When we stepped into room 812, it was as if the world had stopped being real. Only the soft hum of the city outside reminded us that anything else existed. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. You slipped off your coat, and I turned to close the door, but you were behind me before I touched the handle. You didn't kiss me right away. You just pressed your hands to my waist, gently, as though you were asking a question without using words. I leaned into you in answer. That's when your lips found my neck. Slowly, reverently, as if my skin held a secret language. We moved in silence. My back against the cool wall, your body pressed into mine. Every touch, every breath, was deliberate. You undressed me without urgency, one sleeve, then the next. The straps of my dress slid from my shoulders like silk sighing against skin. You looked at me, really looked, before your hands explored what your eyes had already memorized. When you finally lifted me into your arms, carrying me to the bed, I thought I might come undone from the softness of it alone. What we shared that night wasn't rough. It wasn't desperate. It was slow, almost aching in its care. You kissed every inch of me like you were promising to remember it. Your hands mapped me like sacred ground. And when we came together, it wasn't a crash but a surrender. There was heat, yes. There was need. But beneath it, there was stillness. Trust. As if we were both asking for something without saying it out loud. Don't let this be just another night. I remember the way you held me after. Not possessive, not proud. Just close. Your hand traced lazy shapes across my back, like you were writing invisible poems onto my skin. I pretended to sleep just so I could feel you stay longer. You didn't spend the night. I didn't expect you to. I lay awake after you left, sheets pulled to my chin, wondering if you'd regret it. If I would. But I didn't. In the morning, I found the card you'd left. It wasn't a note, not really. Just a pressed camellia flower, and a room number written in clean handwriting. No words. No explanation. I didn't come. Not because I didn't want to, but because I already knew what that second night might have meant. And I was afraid of what I'd leave behind if I stayed too long. So here I am, sitting cross-legged on the bed, the flower resting on my pillow like a question I can't quite answer. And I'm writing you this letter, not because I expect you to read it, but because I need to remember what it felt like to be seen so clearly, even for one night. There's something profoundly erotic about being understood, isn't there? I'll carry the memory of your breath against my collarbone. Of your voice in the darkness. Of your fingertips trailing down my spine like the softest of promises. Goodbye, T. May we never forget what it was to feel like ghosts made flesh, if only for a few perfect hours. M. Part 3. Lisbon, Room 17. Dear A. I didn't come to Lisbon to meet you. I came to forget someone else. I booked the small hotel in Bairro Alto on impulse, late at night with a glass of wine in my hand and an ache in my chest. The photos online showed faded tiles, soft yellow walls, and an iron balcony overlooking crooked rooftops. It looked like the kind of place where a woman could disappear without leaving a trace. That's exactly what I needed. Room 17 is on the second floor, tucked into the corner of the building like a secret. It creaks when I move. The windows stick. The sheets smell faintly of lavender and sun. I loved it instantly. I met you on my second day, in a cafe just around the corner. You sat at the table beside mine, guitar case leaning against your leg, a notebook open in front of you filled with music I couldn't hear. You ordered espresso and scribbled in silence. I watched you from the corner of my eye, curious about your concentration. You looked like a man chasing something invisible. It was your humming that broke the silence between us. Soft, almost careless. A melody that floated through the air and wrapped around me like smoke. I smiled without meaning to. You noticed. You looked up, surprised, but not startled. Our eyes met. Your smile was slow, lopsided. You had the kind of face that made people trust you, gentle, open, sun-kissed. You asked if I spoke Portuguese. I said, "So pouco." You laughed. I asked if you were writing a love song. You said no, not yet. That was how it started. We walked for hours that evening. Through Alphamer's narrow alleys, down cobbled stairs that echoed with music from open windows. You showed me a lookout point I never would have found alone. We watched the sun melt into the Tagus River, and I remember thinking, this is the kind of moment people spend their lives chasing. You didn't kiss me then. Not even when we stood close enough to feel each other's breath. You waited. It wasn't until we were back in front of my hotel, the streetlight casting soft gold over your face, that your fingers brushed mine. And even then, you hesitated. Your voice was quiet when you asked, would it be wrong to come upstairs? I said yes. But I meant no. Room 17 felt different with you in it. Bigger somehow. Warmer. You stepped inside like you belonged, but with reverence, as though you understood that this space had held silence for a long time before you filled it. You didn't rush to touch me. You walked to the window, looked out at the city, and said, "It's beautiful, isn't it?" I said yes. But I meant you. You turned to me, and something shifted in the air, like a song reaching its first crescendo. You crossed the room slowly. When your hands found my face, I leaned into your palms without thinking. Your lips brushed mine, tentative, like a first note testing its place in the harmony. Then you kissed me fully. And the music began. You tasted like espresso and something else I couldn't place, something wild. I unbuttoned your shirt, pausing with every layer, every inch of skin revealed. You kissed my shoulder, my throat, my fingertips, as though each part of me held its own rhythm. You laid me down with care, your body pressed against mine in a slow dance that had no script. Your hands moved like they were learning me by touch, not by sight. When you were finally inside me, I exhaled a breath I hadn't known I was holding. You didn't speak. You just moved. And I followed. It wasn't like anything I'd known before. There was no performance. Only feeling. Your mouth found the hollow beneath my ribs, the soft curve of my hip, the inside of my wrist, like you were leaving invisible signatures only I could feel. And when we both fell over the edge together, it felt like a song finally resolving into its last perfect chord. After, we lay tangled in silence, my head on your chest, your fingers playing a rhythm against my back. You told me about your music, about the city, your restless heart, the nights you played for strangers who never knew your name. I told you nothing. Not really. Just that I was passing through. And maybe that was all you needed to hear. In the morning, I woke before you. The light spilled through the shutters, casting lines across your bare skin. I wanted to watch you sleep forever. But I left instead. I slipped out quietly, leaving the key at the front desk and a note beside you on the pillow. It simply read, "Thank you for the music." I don't know if you ever finished the song. But I know I was part of it. Some nights, When I can't sleep, I hum the melody you never played aloud. And I think of you. Always. M. Part 4. New York, Room 901. Dear E. I never touched you. Not once. Not even by accident. And yet, here I am, writing to you from room 901 of a Manhattan hotel, high above the city that never pauses, thinking of all the ways I almost did. The windows here are tall and endless, like movie screens. The skyline glows blue and silver, sharp against the night. It's beautiful, but it feels like watching someone else's life. One I can't reach. One I chose not to. I'm not sure why I'm writing this now. Maybe it's because I've written to so many others. Men I've touched. Kissed. Undressed. Men whose names I whispered into foreign pillows and left behind with folded sheets and soft regrets. But you were different. You were the one I never had. The one I never dared to want too loudly. We worked together. That already made everything delicate. But it wasn't the rules that stopped me, it was how you looked at me. Like you saw something I didn't even know was visible. You asked the right questions. And worse, you listened. There was that day in the elevator. I had a headache, my makeup smudged from the rain. I felt hollowed out, invisible. But you looked at me and said, "A rough morning?" And it wasn't small talk, it was concern. Quiet. Real. It settled in my chest in a way I didn't know how to carry. We never flirted. Not openly. But our conversations lingered longer than they should. The glances too frequent, the silences too full. There was a moment. I remember it exactly. We were at the Christmas party. Music too loud, laughter too forced. I stood outside on the balcony, needing air, needing space. And you came out a minute later. You didn't say anything right away. Just lit a cigarette with hands that shook slightly from the cold. We stood side by side, saying nothing. The wind bit through our clothes, but neither of us went back in. You offered me your coat. I declined. But your fingers brushed mine when you handed me your lighter. That brief, electric contact, it lit something in me I've never quite extinguished. You never made a move. You never stepped closer. You never asked me to break the rules. And because of that, I sometimes let myself imagine what it would have been like if I had. If I had leaned into you on that balcony. If I had let your coat slip around my shoulders. If I had asked you to follow me to room 901, where the lights of the city could have reflected in your eyes as I whispered my first truth. Maybe we would have kissed like people who'd waited too long. Maybe I would have trembled when your hands found my waist, not from fear, but relief. Maybe you would have undressed me with reverence, with hunger held at bay until it had nowhere else to go. And maybe, in the stillness afterward, I would have told you everything I never could say at the office. But none of that happened. I left the job. You stayed. And we never said goodbye. We never said anything. Yet still, you live here, in the quiet corners of my memory. Not as a regret, but as a maybe. A door I never opened, but always felt behind me. This room feels full tonight. Not with people, but with ghosts. Yours. Mine. The versions of ourselves we never let become real. I'll leave in the morning. I always do. But tonight, I'll sleep with the curtains open. I'll let the city shine on my bare skin. I'll close my eyes and pretend you're beside me, whispering the words we never dared speak. And if I dream of you, please don't wake me. Always. M.